Arwen is set in North Wales, where there was once a wise woman whose name was Ceredwen. And this Ceredwen, she had 2 children. She had a son and a daughter. And the daughter was called Creri, which means beautiful one, beloved. And Creri was as beautiful as the moon upon water. But her son was called Morvran. And he was as black as a crow, as his name suggests. And he was so ugly and stupid, they even called him Avagdhi, which means utter darkness. But Ceredwen, she loved both her children with all her heart, and she longed to bring light and life into the soul of Morvran. And so she decided one day to go up to the mountains of Snowdon, or as they're called in the Welsh tongue, Eryri, the place where the eagles fly. And there she would consult the druids, who are known as the Ferret, the druid alchemists. And there she would learn from them all the different herbs to gather, and under which stars to steep them, under which moons to stir them about in her great iron cauldron, so that she could make a potion of Arwen, 3 drops of which would be an elixir that would bring light and life and enlightenment to her son Morvran. And so she did that. And she came back with them and she put them in her great iron cauldron, and she knew they had to steep there and brew there for a whole year and a day. She didn't want to be doing that herself though, so she went to the nearest village and she found a little peasant boy whose name was Gwion Bach, little Gwion, and she set him to look after the cauldron by putting the kindling underneath in the fire and stirring with a great big wooden spoon until a year and a day would be up. And by that time she knew that the 3 drops of Arwen would be ready for Morvran. So little Gwion did a good job of it. He spent that whole year and a day standing on tiptoe with a big wooden spoon, stirring it sunwise for luck. And at night he would sort of cuddle down underneath the cauldron almost, just getting the warmth from the kindling sticks there. And it was almost a year and a day had passed, and he was getting quite excited. Ceredwen had gone to make all the preparations for Morvran. We don't really know what he thought about it all. I always think of Morvran as a laconic teenager wearing black leather and kind of... But anyway, the story doesn't actually concern him, as you all well know. Because little Gwion gave it one big final stir for luck, and the next thing, 3 drops sprang out of the cauldron and it landed on the hand of the little boy. And because it was burnt, he instinctively put it in his mouth, and the next minute, little Gwion himself imbibed the 3 drops of Arwen. And it was as if everything in his young mind unfurled like a carpet before him. He could see all things past and present and future. But he hadn't really any time to explore that, nor would he need magic, it seemed, to know what Ceredwen was going to do when she found out what had happened. He threw down that wooden spoon and he was out of a hut before you could say Jack Robinson, and there she came running behind him, her face twisted with fury and her feet like thunder on the stone flags. Well, little Gwion ran out of the hut, he ran across the water meadows of Lake Bala, which is where she lived, and with his newfound magical powers, he turned himself into the fastest creature he could think of. He turned himself into a hare, and he bounded away across the water meadows. But she, of course, seeing what had happened, Ceredwen, she turned herself into a greyhound. And although that little hare was swift, why the greyhound was swifter. He came bounding and bounding over. The little hare could feel the hot breath of the dog on his neck. And he came to the lake, and as soon as he could, he dove down into the waters of Lake Bala and hid away in the reeds in the shape of a blue salmon. And he thought he was safe, but no, because as soon as Ceredwen saw that, she turned herself into an otter, and the otter dived down and down and down into the waters of the lake. And soon the little fish was swimming for its life. As he could feel the paws of the otter behind him, he just bunched his tail that way and bunched his tail that way and gave an almighty leap up through the waters. And as soon as he hit the air, he turned himself into a black crow. He flew away up into the skies as high as he could. But of course, Ceredwen, seeing that, she turned herself into a great falcon. And the falcon flew higher than the crow and started to swoop down on the little bird and almost had him between her cruel talons. But at that very last moment, little Guillaume turned himself into the smallest creature he could possibly think of. He actually turned into a little grain of wheat. And the grain of wheat slipped between the talons of the hawk and went spiralling down and down and down, and it landed on the threshing floor of a nearby mill. And there the little grain of wheat hid among the many thousands of other grains, and hoped he'd eluded her at last. But no, Ceridwen, she turned herself into a black hen. And the hen went scrabbling and pecking and thrusting her way all through the thousands of grains until she found the one she was looking for. And the next minute, she'd swallowed it up. And she thought that was the end of him. But of course it wasn't. Because after about a month, her belly began to grow. And after 3 months, it began to grow even bigger. And after 9 months, it was out here. And she gave birth to a baby boy. And well, she knew who that baby was. So she took her great dagger of steel and she went to slit that baby's throat. But when she looked into his eyes, and he was so innocent, and he was so beautiful, and he was her own flesh, she could not bring herself to do it. And so she threw the dagger down. She went out into the forest, and instead she gathered pitch, and she gathered animal hides, and she gathered withy woods from the willows. And she came back, she made a little coracle, a little leather boat. She wrapped the baby up in all the hides and animal skins, and then she put him in the coracle, tucked it under her arm, and off she went down to the seashore. And she threw the coracle with the baby inside out into the waters of the sea, so that the waters could do with him what they would. And how many years, how many hundreds of years, how many hundreds of years that little boat went tossing and spinning on the waves of the sea, I do not know. But in all that time, the baby did not grow or age by one day. And it was, in fact, 500 years later that this story begins again. It begins further south, not far from where I live now, at the estuary of the Dyfi, where they've had all the floods recently, the Aberdyfi River. And around in those parts in those days, there lived a Welsh prince whose name was Elfyn. Now Elfyn, not what you think of for a Welsh prince, or maybe it would be considering it's Prince Charles these days. But either way, he was a bit of a loser. He was a wastrel, he was a gambler, he had all these debts, and he was, pretty much down on his luck when the story takes up again. And it was on the eve of Calan Haf, which is Bealtaine in this country. It was on the eve of May the 1st. And he said to himself, because he was always full of good ideas, he said to himself, on the eve of May, that's when the salmon come up the river, and if I put my nets out between the banks, then maybe I will catch some, and I can take them to market and pay off some of my debts. So he stretched his nets out across the banks of the Dyfi, and he lay down that night in the reeds on the river banks, looking up at the May stars, and hoping and dreaming about that fine fish he would have caught by morning time. But of course, when morning came and the sun rose, and out he waded to his nets, there was nothing at all there. No fish, no gleaming prizes, except there was some little kind of thing, a bundle, all covered with barnacles and limpets at the bottom of the nets. He was about to just disentangle them and throw the little bundle away in disgust when he noticed there was a movement within. And so he carefully took the nets apart, and he could see that there was this little leather something, and there was something inside of it, and it was covered with skins and hides. And so he unwrapped them one by one by one. And when he took the last one off, there inside lay this beautiful baby boy with a shining light about his head. And he was so startled, the first words that came out of his mouth were, "Behold the shining brow," which in the Welsh language is Talisien. At which point the baby leapt out of the coracle, and already he was as tall as a 10-year-old boy. And he said, Yes, I am Talisien, and I come from the region of the summer stars. I know why there is an echo in a hollow. I know why breath is clear, why liver bloody and why silver shines. I know why a bull has horns and why a woman loves. I know why milk is white, why holly green, why ale is bitter, why sea is salt and berries red. I know the beasts of the seabed. I know how many spears make a confrontation and how many drops a shower of rain. I know why fish have scales and why swans' feet are black. I have been a blue salmon. I have been a stag, a dog, a roebuck on the mountain, a hare, a trout, a crow in the air, a stick, a spade, an axe in the hand. I was pecked and swallowed by the black hen, and 9 months within her crop I lay. I have been dead, I have been alive, I am Talisien.
Oh, wow.